I've been developing games for several years now, and of all the tools I use in my process, this is my favorite. My game development sketchbook. I started this sketchbook a little over a year ago, originally to take notes for an assignment, but in the time since, it's evolved into my game dev Swiss Army knife. Essentially, when I need a space to write something down or whip up a sketch or even record something more detailed, I use this book. In the year that I've kept it, I've filled it with pretty much anything from concept art to pseudocode to divine visions from my dreams, I guess. Aside from being my everything book for game development, it has also changed my outlook on the game design process and improved my workflow as a game designer. I would also like to preface that you don't have to be a game artist to start one of these. I believe that anyone in the game space can benefit from a game dev notebook. So without further ado, here's how I use my notebook and why I think you should start one too. Also, I'm going to paint the cover because I want to. As I mentioned before, I originally started this sketchbook to take research notes. I was doing a presentation on gamified learning and I was looking at a lot of scientific articles on game design and gamification. I was having a really hard time getting focused on the project, and for whatever reason I decided to open an empty sketchbook and start filling it with my research. The sketchbook ended up being a great place to collect all my thoughts, and after that I just kept using it. You can use it to take notes on articles and books, but it doesn't have to be scientific or intellectual. This can be a place to take notes on a YouTube tutorial or a podcast. Bottom line, it's not that serious. If there's something that I'm reading or watching or listening to that I want to retain, I grab the book and jot it down. For each of these sections, I'm going to include an actual page in my sketchbook as an example. This page is some notes I took of an article I really enjoyed. It's an article by Thomas Van Dam and Sander Backus. I'm probably butchering that, I apologize. And it's about an alternate Bartles taxonomy that they conceptualized called ACE2. It was a very interesting read, and it was fun to take notes on it. It actually got me thinking about what a three-dimensional taxonomy would look like, as a combination of the two. I think a notebook like this is a good place to experiment with these ideas. Now this is probably obvious, but I also use my sketchbook for sketching, who would have guessed. When I'm making art for my games, I enjoy starting my process with a traditional sketch before moving to digital or pixel art, and most of my sketches end up here. For the sketches I've done on other paper or index cards or sticky notes, I also like to cut and paste them into my game dev notebook. Alongside the sketches, I usually write myself small notes about things I like, don't like, or what could use improvement. I like that the sketches and the notes give me a way to track the iterations of a design. Here are some concept art pages for the characters in my game Flightless Fighters, which you can wishlist on Steam, link in the description. You can see the notes I left next to each drawing, or maybe you can't, it's pretty small and my handwriting isn't what it used to be. I eventually referenced these pages and notes when I created the finalized artwork for the penguins. If you want to know more about Flightless Fighters and how I design it, you should check out my latest devlog. I had fun working on it, and I think you'll have fun watching it. Another part of my process is thumbnailing, which is basically making a tiny sketch of a scene to figure out the composition. I enjoy thumbnailing because it allows me to mess up smaller. Going straight into a big piece without a concrete idea of composition leads to a lot of erasing and rearranging. Making a bunch of small drawings is good for finding the best iteration of a concept quickly, thus improving workflow in the larger piece. I also have aphantasia, meaning I struggle to visualize things in my head, so thumbnailing lets me get a clearer vision of my ideas. Here's a page with thumbnails for the stages in Flightless Fighters, along with one of my YouTube thumbnails. The Game Dev Notebook is my dedicated place for thumbnailing. I find my Game Dev Notebook very useful for coding as well as art. I like to start off my programming process by writing pseudocode, which is essentially the basic logic of the code without any of the syntax. I'm pretty sure there's like an official syntax for pseudocode, at least I had to learn one at some point, but I do not remember what it is, nor do I use it. So again, it's not that serious. Planning pseudocode out on paper helps me mentally separate it from the actual programming in a way. Programming isn't usually my forte, so jumping straight into a development environment can be intimidating for me. Starting out on paper gives me a mental stepstone that helps me get started without being intimidated into procrastinating for a month. I also sometimes take notes on documentation I'm not yet familiar with, and this is a good place for that too. This page was from when I was learning about state machines and programming. At this point in my research, I didn't quite understand how state machines work or how I would actually implement one, so these notes didn't end up being super helpful. But that's okay. Sometimes you have to get the unhelpful stuff out on paper so you can figure out what's actually helpful. What was actually helpful here was to make a list of what functions each state should have. This list made the state machine programming way easier, and I gained a better understanding of the concept as a whole. When I got my game to the point of playtesting, the notebook became the perfect place to record my testers' feedback. When I have playtest days, I watch my testers as they play, and every time they make a suggestion or find a bug, I write it all down on one page. As I continue developing my game and fixing these issues, I can cross out each comment I resolve. This goes along with writing pseudocode as well. If a playtester discovers a bug and you have an idea of how to fix it, you can write some pseudocode or notes right there. When you're looking over that page later, you'll see the notes and implementing the solution becomes that much faster. This is the list from a playtest I did a while ago, and I added those ticks next to each item once I fixed the issue in question. In this case, I put the quality of life suggestions on a separate list, but if you don't have the time or space for it, you can color code it instead. Now, none of these items are complete sentences or fully fledged user stories, but they don't have to be. Just write something detailed enough to remember what you were talking about later. On top of these more specific use cases, I use the Game Dev Notebook for pretty much any notes. When someone tells me about a resource to look at, or a program I should try, or something I might find interesting, I grab the book and make a small note. I tend to remember things best after I've written them down. This practice helps me retain those small comments or suggestions that I might not have remembered otherwise. So, now you've seen how I use my notebook, maybe this alone has convinced you to start your own. The book's usefulness in my process is definitely a major reason for why I use it, but I also find that it improves my mentality when it comes to game development. First of all, I enjoy the tactility of the Game Dev Notebook. My work as a game designer is almost always digital, and sometimes it doesn't feel real. I, for some reason, lack object permanence, and that makes it easy for me to forget how much progress I've made in my games, and that can break my motivation. The work I do in the Game Dev Notebook feels more tangible. It gives me a physical representation of progress that I enjoy looking back on. Now, as a scatterbrained person, I especially love the notebook's functionality as a dump chest. Let me explain. I play a lot of Minecraft, and when I build a place to store my blocks and items, I usually include what I call a dump chest. This chest functions as a place to dump my inventory when I'm busy with other things, and then I'll come back later to sort those items into my storage system. Do I ever sort through that chest? No. Do I have 100 dump chests all over my survival world that drive me insane? Yes, but that's besides the point. The Game Dev Notebook is like a dump chest in the sense that it lets me quickly collect thoughts, explore concepts, and write down those aha moments. Then later, when I have the time, I can mentally or digitally sort through those thoughts, when otherwise I might have metaphorically died in lava and lost my whole inventory, and this is why I have a million chests in my survival world. Metaphorically. In a similar sense, the sketchbook also helps me break out of my perfectionism. I know a lot of artists that hesitate to start something because they worry the product won't end up exactly like how they imagined it, and I'm no exception. I think the kind of haphazard nature of the notebook helps me rationalize that it doesn't need to be perfect. It has a bunch of random stuff in there, so it's okay for this book to be messy, it's okay to scratch out broken pseudocode or write notes in the margins, it's okay for my sketches to suck because the book isn't supposed to be good anyway. So, in effect, the Game Dev Notebook has streamlined one of the most difficult parts of my process, which is, well, starting the process. It gives me a place to put all my ideas so they don't fall out of my head, and its use cases apply to pretty much any area of game development. Now, the problems my Game Dev Notebook solves might not apply to others as well as they apply to me, but there's a good chance that at least some of this can be useful to you. I really think anyone who develops games can benefit at least a little from a Game Dev Notebook, whether you're doing it professionally or just for fun. So, to close off, I encourage you to give the notebook a try and let me know how it goes. If you've made it this far in the video, thank you so much. I wanted to give you guys a window into my development process, so leave a like if you enjoyed it, and let me know what you think in the comments. If you're new here, I usually make content about developing my indie game Flightless Fighters. If a fighting game about penguins sounds interesting to you, you might enjoy my previous devlogs. There's a link to my latest one in the end card. And with that, thank you so much for watching, and stick around for bloopers. I need water. Who knew that being hydrated would make it easier to talk? If a fighting game about penguins... yeah. I've said that sentence so many times it doesn't sound real.